Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Amy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in Fallout 4 at the Red Rocket truck stop with a very good boy, if slightly glitchy, and the other doggos are around here somewhere, so... sorry this video is a wee bit late. I had a medical appointment yesterday and things kind of got behind with a few things, but we're here. Hi dogmeat. And we're talking about the next part of the medical side of the Wasteland Survival Guide, which is Chems. So there's a huge number of pre-war Chems around, and some that were kind of created post-war as well. They are called Chems instead of drugs, and that's due to get the game classified in certain territories so that the game can actually be sold there, particularly Australia. Because they don't want to be glorifying the use of illegal substances, let's say, which is fair enough. But a lot of these items are potentially addictive, but they do provide you some in-game benefits either for combat or for other interactions like speech checks or hacking terminals or whatnot. And there are certainly some of them that would have potential medical applications, so I thought we would talk about the most common ones and what they do and what they're used for. So first up is Buffout, which you can see here. Yep, you can see the name. So it's obviously in tablet form, and the name gives you quite a big clue to what Buffout is. It's a steroid, so it's used to increase strength and endurance and reflexes, used by lots of athletes before the war, one assumes illegally, because they probably had the same sort of rules around performance enhancing drugs in athletic competitions that we do in the real world. And in the games it boosts your strength and endurance and sometimes your hit points as well, so we'll take a wee look at its properties. So yeah, in this game you get +2 strength, +2 endurance and +50 to your maximum HP. So potentially quite a useful one. One of the interesting things about Buffout actually comes from Fallout 3. So when you visit Little Lamplight in Fallout 3, which you need to do to get through to Vault 87, if you talk to Lucy, who's the doctor, she tells you that she uses Buffout to prevent and to treat rickets in the children that are living there. You can actually set up a deal via Macready in order to actually sell the Buffout to her, to trade the Buffout to her. So rickets, if you don't know what it is, thankfully it's something that's not really that common nowadays, and it's a weakening of the bones causing deformities and growth problems in children as well, and generally it's caused by a vitamin D deficiency. Sometimes it can be a calcium deficiency or potentially both. So it is something that's very common in cases of malnutrition. And there's two sources of vitamin D. So your dietary sources include things like red meat, eggs, particularly egg whites, oily fish, which we don't really have any kind of examples of really in this game. We've got some eggs, some Mirelurk eggs, they might have vitamin D in them. And a lot of foods that you can buy in the modern world are fortified with vitamin D as well, because it is such an essential nutrient for our bones, for our muscles, and it does have some other functions in the body as well, so it's an important one. And the second source of vitamin D, if we head outside, is somewhere over there, I guess. Yeah, the sun. So when our skin is exposed to sunlight even, it produces vitamin D. Anyone that's ever kept pet reptiles will know this, or at least they should know this, that they need to have artificial UV light when they're in captivity to simulate the sun to maintain their bone health by producing the vitamin D. And one thing that's interesting is that in some places, especially places like the UK, where we are really quite far north and we have quite long periods of darkness in the autumn and the winter, It's strongly recommended that everyone in the UK takes a vitamin D supplement over the course of from September until springtime in the March or April. And we are a lot further north than a large chunk of the continental US here, despite what the flat map of the world would make you think. The northernmost parts of Scotland are actually pretty close to the Arctic Circle. Personally, I do take vitamin D supplements all year round because I live in Scotland, and also I suffer from psoriasis, and vitamin D supplementation or sunlight exposure is a potential treatment for managing the symptoms of psoriasis. So that's the reason. So I do take it every single day to be on the safe side. And kind of similar reasons. So that's why it is an issue for the kids of Little Lamplight, because they generally don't leave the caverns. Occasional scouting or scavenging, some of them will go, but for the most part they stay inside the cave, so they don't get sun exposure at all. And dietary sources of vitamin D are going to be pretty rare in the caverns, so because they live off the sort of fungus that absorbs all the radiation, and that means that they potentially would be at risk of rickets. So obviously Buffout must contain something that helps, either it has vitamin D or something else that helps maintain bone density and managing the calcium metabolism within the body to keep the bones working properly. So that's an interesting little side note. So Buffout does have potential medical applications, particularly it seems to be beneficial for malnutrition cases. So that's an interesting little one there. So, while these drugs would probably have been used illegally by many people and used in ways that they shouldn't be, there would be situations where potentially a doctor would prescribe something like Buffout to help with certain things. So there we go. And then we're on to Jet. Now, I know there's a lot of chat about Jet and how it may have been a pre-war invention or may have been a post-war invention. Not really going to kind of get into the ins and outs of that right now, because that's a whole separate topic on its own, but it certainly exists in the Wasteland now, and it's a stimulant, so most likely some form of amphetamine type drug, but it gives a rush of energy and a rush of euphoria. It also seems to have some kind of hallucinogenic properties, like making time slow down, so while you speed up, and it's administered by inhalation. So it's a device that's very similar to what would be used as an inhaler for people with asthma. And in a lot of the games, it boosts your action points or your action point refresh, and gives you more action points as well sometimes. But in Fallout 4, it kind of slows time. So we'll have a look at the properties. So it slows time for 10 seconds. So you're still moving at the same speed, but everybody else is moving slower, which means that you're technically moving faster. So it's basically, in essence, it still lets you move faster and perform more actions in the same time frame that you would normally. That's kind of what Jet does. So it does have a lot of potential uses within the game itself. And in terms of medical applications, amphetamines are generally used for managing ADHD and narcolepsy. At one point in sort of recent history, they were used as a diet pill to help with weight loss, but they're not anymore because of the potential side effects and the problems that they cause. So much more common for these things to be used illegally, which is of course not recommended, can be very dangerous for you. And there's a lot of different variants of Jet in the game. So in Fallout 3 you can combine it with sugar bombs. There's a ghoul that does that to make Ultra Jet. Fallout New Vegas there's a few, but an example is that you can use Castor Venom and a couple of other things to make Turbo, which lets you run faster. And obviously in Fallout 4 you can do all kinds of fun combinations with things. I have so much stuff in this save file, it's kind of wild. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. It does also seem to be pretty addictive. A lot of people, a lot of the raiders and things seem to use a lot of Jet, and any addiction that you get does have a negative impact on your special stats and things, but we'll get into the details of that later on. And then next one here is Med-X. So this one's an opiate. It was originally intended to be morphine, but they had to give it a trade name because otherwise the games wouldn't be classified or be allowed to be sold in Australia, so they had to change it. Again, they don't want to glorify using addictive substances recreationally, because that is really bad for you as well as being illegal, so we're obviously not going to encourage that. But it is something that happens with medications, so a lot of medications will go by kind of trade names, especially because some of them, their kind of official generic names are really difficult to pronounce. So you might know things like Prozac, which is fluoxetine, which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's an antidepressant. Or Advil, which is a common one in the States side, and that is ibuprofen. Here in the UK, the common brand of ibuprofen is called Nurofen, but you can obviously get the generic versions, which tend to be cheaper than the brand names, and it's still basically the same thing, but it's a whole kind of thing with the brands and patents and all sorts, so kind of a complicated thing there. But yeah, it's not unrealistic to have a kind of colloquial name for medications that people are more familiar with. So it's kind of realistic, but it means that the game could still be sold. So opiates are extremely potent painkillers. They act directly on your central nervous system, so it blocks pain transmission to the brain and dulls your responses and your awareness of pain. It does also have a potential sedative effect, and it can cause drowsiness, and they're also pretty addictive, as I'm sure we all know, and they become less effective with regular use. So someone that is taking these things regularly, if they need stronger pain relief, you often have to give them higher doses than normal in order to, kind of get the same effect that they need. And there are quite a few side effects of opiates as well. Constipation's one. But the most important one is respiratory depression. So respiratory depression means reducing both the rate of breathing, the respiratory rate, and the depth of breathing. So people tend to then take shallower breaths rather than big deep breaths, which reduces the amount of oxygen that's available. So in excessive doses, such as an overdose, this respiratory depression can become life-threatening and can be very serious. So it is, at least in the real world, we do have an antidote to it, which is a drug called naloxone, and that's one that a lot of kind of emergency people can carry and administer in these cases when they're called out to someone that has taken too much of one of these substances, because it can reverse the effects very quickly and get them breathing again, which obviously is helpful when you want to save their lives. So that's something that does at least exist, and obviously it does have medical applications. Med-X is a major medical application because of the pain relief effect. If you've got a broken leg, if you have been shot in the head by some dude in a very snappy suit, you're going to want some good pain relief on board. So Med-X is at least available, and obviously, as you can see here, it tends to boost your damage resistance, and for some reason it increases poison resistance as well, which is kind of weird, but that's the thing. But the damage resistance, which means that you can tolerate more damage because you're not feeling the pain, which makes sense. But it's certainly something that should be used with caution, but obviously does have extensive medical utility for surgery and treating major injuries and that kind of a thing. Maybe turn this little gas station into a hospital here, actually. That could be quite fun. But yeah, so that's an important one. And the original opium, which is derived from plants as well, it's something that has been in use in the medical profession for a long time, and it works, but you do have to be cautious with both dosing. Humans are actually more sensitive to opiates than some animals, so dogs, for example, can tolerate a kind of higher dose per kilogram of body weight than what we can, which is quite interesting. And then the ones that you need to use to take down large animals, like zoo animals and the like, can be very, very serious to humans as well. So, like all of these things, not something to take lightly. So next up on the list is Mentats. So they come in this little tin, and they're little red pills basically, and you can see actually on that tin there they're made by Medtech, who was also the company that made FEV. But Mentats aren't really a combat chem. They are kind of more intellectual in terms of their benefits, so boosting memory, boosting mental processes and creativity. So in the game, when you pick them up, you will find that they boost your intelligence and your perception, sometimes charisma, depending on the game, and there are kind of varieties of Mentats that kind of have other effects on your charisma and things like that. And they were popular at parties, and they were popular among creatives before the war. There is a note in Fallout 76 which does mention the benefit of using Mentats for people with Alzheimer's disease, so there is potential benefit for kind of cognitive decline or neurological degeneration like that. But there's also evidence that they cause migraines and can cause neurological disorders and changes. And you can kind of see that when you talk to Dr. Mobius in Old World Blues and Fallout New Vegas. He's a Mentats addict because you can find literally hundreds of tins of them in his little room. But he's definitely showing signs of, cognitive decline and neurological degeneration, and potentially his Mentats habit has something to do with that. So, the brain pills can be interesting in that regard. And another one, which I'm going to go into more detail on this one, I think in the Wasteland biographies next week. Students probably use Mentats quite a lot, and as we know, Boston is it's a university city. There's a few universities in the kind of city area, some of the kind of most prominent ones as well. So you can imagine that students would use them to get an edge and maybe get better grades and things. And there's a high school, let me see if I can find it. Well, I found the location, I'd forgotten where it was. So down kind of in the southern part of the map, so near Fallon's department store and Milton General Hospital, you've got Shaw High School here. So that's an interesting little place to visit, where the Mentats were secretly distributed to the students to boost the grades for the whole school, which would then get more funding that the principal was then embezzling. But I'd like to cover that little story in Wasteland biographies because I think it's quite an interesting one, so look out for that next Tuesday. And I say you can get kind of variants of the Mentats. I think I might have, I've got berry Mentats here that has different flavour and they have different effects. So this one gives you +5 to intelligence and also highlights living targets, which is an interesting little thing. I don't know if we've got any other ones. I know there's a type of orange Mentats. But yeah, so you can make some of these in this game as well, which is pretty good. Medical uses do seem kind of limited. Maybe if you are the medic, you might find the extra intelligence useful, but potentially also for kind of cognitive declines, dementia, Alzheimer's kind of thing. But in the Wasteland, there's probably not a massive number of people that live long enough to even require that kind of thing. Unfortunately, just because of the very nature of the Wasteland and things. So next on our little table here is Psycho. So this one, the name again gives you a bit of a clue as to kind of what effect it has. And this one's a military grade chem that was developed by researchers funded by General Constantine Chase, who you may know if you know your Fallout history, was in charge of the fight to take back Anchorage, Alaska from the Chinese. And this was when this chem was first used, was during that battle to retake Anchorage. And that's why if you play through Operation Anchorage in Fallout 3 and you go into the simulation, you do find Psycho available to you. You obviously can't bring it out of the simulation, but if it's something that you want to use, you can do it there. So that makes sense. That's kind of where the history comes from. The effects of it does vary by game. So when you're playing the classic Fallout games, Fallout 2, using Psycho increases your damage resistance. In Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, it increases your damage output instead. And in Fallout 4, we go back into our aid category, which I tend to stockpile. Fallout 4, it does both. So your damage is up 25% and your damage resistance is up 25%. It's a bit similar. There is a chem in Fallout New Vegas called Slasher that is very similar to this. So the point is that it dampens brain functions and increases aggression and strength. So most likely what it does is it's an adrenal stimulant, so it stimulates adrenaline or epinephrine. Both terms are acceptable for that particular hormone. And your sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight response, so what your body does to increase blood pressure, increase heart rate, increase respiratory rate, to get you ready to fight or to run away. So Psycho likely kind of stimulates that process within the body, which would make you then more effective in combat potentially, and also more likely to ignore any minor injuries that you receive. So that kind of ties in with the effects that you see in the game. And interestingly, because of that reason, because Psycho probably stimulates your heart rate and increases your blood pressure and things, we know that it is dangerous for people that have pre-existing heart disease to use Psycho, and it can kill them. There's definitely a couple of instances of that. One is John Cassidy, who is Cass's father and also a companion in Fallout 2, and he has a heart issue. So if he is given Psycho and uses Psycho, he will die. And then another one, which is an interesting little side quest. So in Fallout New Vegas, if you are working with the NCR, you're given a mission to deal with Pacer, who is the King's second in command and is inciting a lot of the fights between the Kings and the NCR in Freeside, and the NCR want you to stop this, and they kind of decide, well, if you can't talk Pacer round, you can't talk the King round, then you might have to just assassinate Pacer because he's the instigator. And if you ask around, you can learn that Pacer is addicted to Jet, but he does also have a heart problem, which means that you then have the option of assassinating Pacer by planting some Psycho in his Jet stash, and then next time he uses, he dies. So, it gives you a nice sneaky little assassination method that means that you don't risk any kind of aggro from the other Kings or anything like that, and they don't know that you've killed them. So that's an interesting little kind of side quest. And in Operation Anchorage, if you collect all the kind of data and things, there is a holotape that does discuss long-term side effects of Psycho, which include dementia, so again, neurological decline, include psychosis, which kind of makes sense if you're activating the aggression centres in the brain and staying in that kind of fight or flight mode for a long period of time. It can actually cause some changes within the brain as well and potentially affect you in your mental health. And obviously addiction as well, and Psycho is one that is fairly common to get addicted to. In terms of potential medicinal uses, you might find that something like that, an adrenal stimulant, could be helpful if you have to perform CPR and you need to stimulate adrenaline in order to save someone's life. But it's definitely more useful for if you're going into tough combat situations, and there's really not a lot of kind of medical applications that you would find Psycho useful for, but potentially as a last ditch if you're attempting to resuscitate someone, it could come in handy. But yeah, it's an interesting one, so one to be careful with as well, I think. And in Fallout 4. So if we go and have a look at the chemistry workstation, because this thing gives you quite a lot of things. So, you know, you've got loads of potential crafting recipes here. So in your healing, you can make your own radaway and stuff like that. But the thing I want to talk about is the combinations of different chems. So you can make berry mentats, which we talked about. You can make buff jet, so you combine Buffout and jet, get strength, endurance, max AP, max HP up, buff tats, which improves your perception, as well as having the benefits of Buffout. Your great mentats, which give you charisma +5 and improve your buying and selling prices. So, you know, probably not the most useful, quite a niche use there. And then you can actually make your own. You'll get your orange mentats, which boost your perception and give you VATS accuracy. And then some of your kind of useful combat ones. Psycho Jet is a really good one because it boosts your damage resistance, and AP. Psycho Buff gives you more damage and more endurance and things. Yeah, Fury, where you combine Berserk, and that gives you melee damage resistance, and perception. Well, you lose perception actually for that one. Jet fuel that, you know, loads of these kinds of things. Ultra Jet as well, which doesn't need sugar bombs anymore in this one. It needs blood leaf instead, but that gives you your AP as well as slowing time, because Jet slows time in this game. Overdrive, where you put Nuka-Cola in with Psycho, so you're putting an adrenal stimulant in with caffeine. So yeah, jet fuel where it's involving flamer fuel, probably wouldn't recommend that in real life, but it's certainly one of the things that I think was really well done in Fallout 4 is this, you know, the crafting system. There's just so much to it. I think it's done really, really well, and there is a certain degree of that in Fallout New Vegas, although Fallout New Vegas' crafting system allows you to make more actual kind of herbal remedies rather than just manufacturing straight up chems. So that's something we're going to talk about next week, is the kind of herbal side of things and some of the crafting stuff in Fallout 4 and Fallout New Vegas, because I think it's really, really good. And then of course addiction is a factor in the games. You can become addicted to chems. You'll normally get a wee notification in the corner, but if you want to check your stats and show effects, I've got the mole rat disease on this one, then if you're in withdrawal from something you're addicted to, then you lose points in your special, or you lose damage resistance or radiation resistance, and then you'd have to keep using the same chem in order to stop these you know, these kind of penalties essentially. But if you do get an addiction in the older games, you could kind of wait it out and it would stop after a few days of you not using anything, and then you'd be back to normal. Otherwise, in the newer games from Fallout 3 onwards, you do have to get treatment for your addiction, so you can go to a doctor and pay them to do something to detox you and get you through the withdrawals, I guess. You can use Fixer in Fallout New Vegas. Or similar thing here is Addictol, which does look exactly like Jet, but it works to cure addictions. So yeah, so cure all addictions, that's all it does, and that's nice and easy. And then you've got this one, which is fun, which is the refreshing beverage. And it does lots of things. So it takes a lot of stuff to make your refreshing beverage, but it does have a lot of benefits because it cures your addictions. It gives you 500 HP, and getting to 500 max HP is pretty radical, and also 1000 rads. So refreshing beverages are really, really good, but they I'm trying to remember, is it the chemistry workstation that you make them? Yeah. So your refreshing beverage, in order to make it, you need antiseptic, a blood pack, purified water, radaway ×2, and a stim pack. So quite a big resource drain, but it's more effective than any of the individual components on their own. So it cures your addictions as well. So it's quite a useful thing to have on hand. And especially I think using chems in survival mode is even more challenging, because if you use chems it can have effects on your hunger, your thirst, increases your risk of catching illnesses and all that kind of thing. So that's going to be the next topic here, is to talk about the survival mode stuff. So I'm going to switch to a different save file. Okay, so welcome back to Sanctuary, and we're now in survival mode. So this is a survival mode save file. It's kind of an early survival mode save file, but that's where we are. Because the survival mode of Fallout 4 adds illnesses to the game that impact you in some way if you catch them. So these illnesses are parasites, insomnia, lethargy, fatigue, weakness and infection. Parasites, for example, make you require more food in order to be satisfied. Lethargy massively reduces your action point refresh rate, and infection causes periodic damage to your health and you lose hit points over time because of it. So obviously if you get one of these illnesses it can be kind of difficult. It does affect your staying power in combat and can cause all sorts of problems for you. So generally you're going to want to kind of get treatment for them where you can. So you would need to either find a doctor, and doctors in Fallout 4 are actually quite few and far between. There's a couple of them about, but not really that many. And you obviously have to pay for it as well. Or you need to use antibiotics. Now, I could talk for hours about the issue with it being antibiotics that's used as the one-size-fits-all treatment for all these things, because antibiotics have got quite a specific definition. They are agents that deal with bacterial infections, not viruses, fungi, parasites or anything else, just bacterial infections. And the misuse of antibiotics in real life for antibiotic resistance is a really big issue, but it is beyond the scope of this video. If anyone's interested in that topic and learning more about it, I could make a sort of non-game related video on that subject, but it's a bit beyond what we're talking about here because that's what they decided to put in the game, even if it is a bit misleading. So in the game you can make antibiotics, but you do need to have the chemist perk. So it's down here next to your you've got your refreshing beverage, which you also need chemist for in survival mode, as you do for stim packs and radaway, and then your antibiotics. So you need acid times 2, 3 glowing fungus, 2 purified water and 3 stim packs, which is a lot of materials, especially things that you're going to need to have on you like water and stim packs. So not an easy thing to do, plus you also need to have enough intelligence to take chemist. But the antibiotics do cure these illnesses, so it's something that you do want, and you can occasionally find them in first aid boxes and things, but they're kind of a rare spawn sometimes, so a lot of that comes down to luck. And then there's also 3 kind of what people tend to refer to as the herbal remedies, although remedy is a misleading term for that, because the term remedy means a treatment, so you're treating something that's already happened. And the game's quite unclear about these herbal ones, what they actually do. It doesn't really explicitly tell you, it just says improves your resistance. So what that means is that these are prophylactic, which means that they're preventative, so it's something that you're using to prevent a certain thing from happening. So you're supposed to use them before you engage in risky behaviour like swimming, fighting ghouls or sleeping, which are all things that can increase your chance of getting an illness, along with being out in the rain and various other things. If you use radaway, that suppresses your immune system, all these things that increase your risk. So in order to basically prevent specific illnesses that you would really not want to have, you would use one of these herbal remedies for that instead. They do require quite a lot of things in order to kind of make them as well. So again, they're not an easy thing to get hold of. So that's part of the challenge of survival mode, is that you have to find what you need to survive. So it's good that they aren't just something that you're just going to find easily dotted about and be able to make hundreds of. So let's look at the herbal anodyne first. So anodyne is actually a term for a painkiller. So it's a bit of an odd one that it works against insomnia and weakness, but that's what the game creators decided to do. So yeah, it improves your resistance to insomnia and weakness, and you need 2 carrot flowers, a glowing fungus, a melon blossom, 2 purified water, 2 thistle, and a wild razor green. So again, these are not the most common plants and things that you're going to find. So you are going to have to kind of go looking for all of these if you want to be able to make these, which is interesting. And then you've got the herbal stimulant, which does make sense. It improves your resistance to fatigue and lethargy. Stimulants do that, so that kind of makes sense. And again, recipe's kind of similar. You've got Nash Blossom, Glowing Fungus, Gourd Blossom, Melon Blossom, Purified Water, and Wild Razor Grain. Again, not the most common plants to find. You'd have to really go out and search and collect what you can in order to be able to make these. You can randomly find them in containers, but it's quite rare. And then the final one is your herbal antimicrobial, which again makes sense. So your resistance to infection and parasites, because the term, and this is one that a lot of people get mixed up with, the term antimicrobial encompasses things that are effective against bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. So all antibiotics are antimicrobials, but not all antimicrobials are antibiotics. It is something that a lot of people kind of get a bit confused about, but antimicrobials do work against other infectious agents, not just bacteria, so that does kind of fit here. And again, your recipe is like ash blossom, carrot flower, glowing fungus, gourd blossoms, purified water, and thistles. So you really need to be out there collecting all the plants you can find if you want to make these herbal remedies for yourself to prevent specific infections or illnesses that can be a problem for you. So it's quite a big kind of complicated thing, and there really is, and especially in Fallout 4, there's a lot of new chems. You've got your Excel, the Day Tripper, and things like that. It's a big kind of complicated thing. I think you can make most of them as well. You can certainly make a lot of the kind of common ones that you would find. But there's just so many consumables, and there's so many options in Fallout 4, especially if you're playing on survival mode. And I think having some of the herbal remedies and things is quite interesting, and certainly New Vegas has a really good crafting system for stuff like that, where you can make things like healing powder and anti-venom and all that kind of thing. So I think digging into the kind of herbalism side of it in New Vegas and the crafting system there, and possibly to a degree the crafting system here in Fallout 4, I think that'd be quite interesting for next time, collecting plants and stuff to make useful things. So look out for that. And as I mentioned earlier, on Tuesday I plan to talk about Rusty Burton and the principal in Shaw High School in this game, because I think that's quite a fun and interesting story. So if you've not come across that before and you're interested, make sure you subscribe so that you'll be notified when I upload. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.